Hello and welcome to this week's edition, an Indy 500 preview edition of IndyCar Weekly. I'm your host, Nathan Brown, the motorsports insider with the Indianapolis Star, joined this week again by my co-host, Stefan Wilson. We'll be breaking down everything we saw from Indy 500 qualifying weekend, going through the grid and looking ahead to this Sunday's 108th running of the greatest spectacle in racing as well. Lots of things to get to. A really jam-packed weekend from qualifying that I want to spend a little time on. And then there's a lot of really interesting things to dive into to kind of dissect where we feel like this race is going to go in just a couple days. We're taping on Tuesday morning, so 5 days ahead, almost exactly, of the green flag for Sunday's 500. Stefan, you're watching from home, qualifying weekend. You said off pod, glued to the TV. I was glued to things as well. It was especially a really wild Saturday. One of the numbers that I felt like stood out to me the most, we ran through the whole field, and I think we only had 27 cars that had made, completed, and had passed tech on their entries, which was wild. We don't normally see that. What was it like watching all of this unfold, particularly the action that we saw on Saturday?
Yeah, it was thrilling. I think NBC did a really good job of just capturing the excitement, the tension, and everything that goes along with Indy 500 qualifying. The broadcasters did a fantastic job of just covering the action. So kudos to them. And all week I was pretty much glued to the TV. It was really tough not to be there and not to be able to be being out in a car and trying to make it into the show myself. But it kind of fueled me and gave me a bit of determination to come back next year. So we'll see what happens on that front. But some really interesting storylines. What I took out of it, that I should never make another prediction ever, because it seems like the last two predictions I've made, Porsche being a threat at Barber and Palou being a threat for Pole, both just completely went upside down. So I feel like we should call you Nostradamus Brown now. Almost had
Really
willpower.
close. Really close.
I saw that happening, and I was just like, no way. Nathan just absolutely crystal balled this. Team Penske's not had the best qualifying cars the last couple of years, and all of a sudden they've got 3 on the front row, which is really cool to see. First time they've done that in 30 years. Is it over 30 years?
Over 36, I think. And
36 years.
It's the second time they've done it, and it's also just the second time that we've seen it happen in this whole field, in this whole race.
So it was a cool picture to see the one back in the 80s, and yesterday's, and seeing that comparison. So exciting weekend. I think the star drives for me were Kyle Larson, obviously as a rookie, first time attempt. I mean, I knew he was going to be up there. You put a top driver, first class driver in top machinery, they're gonna star, in qualifying for sure. The race is a different element, so we'll see. He's got a lot of hurdles to overcome this weekend. That learning curve is just going to accelerate even further due to having to time runs, deal with traffic, and that's going to be another big step. I saw a couple instances in practice yesterday where he didn't quite get that timing right, and he had to really check up and lost a couple of places. So I think that's going to be the big challenge for him to overcome on this weekend. Hunter Ray doing an amazing job for driving Ryan Bolkusic, getting that car into the fast 12. Helped a little by the drop off in some of the Hondas and the couple of plenum events that probably stopped a couple of cars leapfrogging him into that fast 12. But all that being said, P12 for driving Ryan Bolt in a one-off, that's awesome to see. And Rinus VeeKay, man, crashing at Indy in qualifying usually is day over, potentially weekend over. I mean, he's doing 230 when he loses the rear on the exit of turn 3. And I actually wasn't watching the TV at that particular moment. I think I was dealing with my son, but I pulled up Twitter and I saw a couple of comments of cars toast, days over for Arenas. And I was like, oh, must have been a really big crash. And again, if you think back to like 2017, when Bourdais crashed in qualifying, really pushing it, you're thinking, oh God, I hope he's okay. And then I watched it and I was like, how do you get, I mean, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And I think it's a combination of lucky and good, because the way he spins and just lightly, brushes the wall. They don't have to go to a backup car. They change a couple of corners and get that car out in, I think it was about 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
Just extraordinary. And then puts it in the Fast 12. Just amazing. So those are my 3 star drivers of the day. So
yeah, it's one thing to I know it's a little bit different situation from what Andretti Global and Marcus Ericsson dealt with truly going to a full-on backup car after he crashed on Thursday. So had they done that with a backup car, I think we're talking about a whole different level of unbelievable. But still, the fact that team, who is great and has an incredible qualifying history at the 500, but at the same time is not nearly as big and bulked up and deep as these other teams that we have, for them just to be able to give Arenas a car that he could do that with in, as you said, 3 hours, really, I think, from crash to rolling out onto the grid to make another attempt, was insanely impressive. That Arenas in the heat of the day could just kind of shrug all that off. And while we're seeing these plenum events that are going on where I'm sure there's some level of doubt, frustration, curiosity about what the heck is happening with these other Chevy cars. You're in a Chevy car and you go and jump, I think it was from 22nd to 11th or 12th, basically.
No, he was 29th. Yeah. He was 29th or 30th. Yeah, I think there was only one car behind him. So
maybe I'm thinking of what Hunter Ray did. That might be what I had in my head.
Ray, yeah.
So I don't know. That was, and we didn't get to talk about it a whole lot because there was so much other chaos going on throughout the weekend. But you're right in giving them praise. That was an under the radar great performance of the weekend. It's also his worst qualifying performance, and we'll get to more of that here in a second. But the fact that it's his 5th 500 and 7th is the worst that he's ever started on the grid is just wild.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get going. Run through the grid here. We'll kind of just hit some storylines, look back, look ahead. Starting, kind of just work our way row by row through the field. And we will start, of course, as we mentioned earlier, this Team Penske front row lockout. And really interesting tidbit looking back to that 1988 year, last time and only time that this has been done before in the race's history. A factoid from IndyCar and IMS's PR department. So that race, very similarly, was started on pole by a driver running a Pennzoil sponsored car, Rick Mears, running the Yellow Submarine. Second spot was a driver who had won the race once before in Danny Sullivan. And on the outside of that front row was Al Unser Sr., who had won the race the year prior. All of those things repeated across Team Penske's drivers mirrored that way. Really wild.
That's wild. Wow.
Weird how history works. So you look at this grid, you look at these 3 drivers. Who do you feel like has the best chance from what you've seen in how their cars are working in practice and traffic leading, just kind of from what we've seen from them last week and some of the speed that they showed in qualifying? Who do you feel like has the best chance to win from this Penske front row?
It's challenging to pick one, because I feel like Joseph Newgarden would be the choice, except he's slightly slower than his teammates. but I feel like that's just in qualifying trim. If you look at the race running, Newgarden's had the edge. So it's tough. I feel like McLaughlin might have the fastest car, but maybe he's still not quite ready yet in terms of that racecraft and the timing that's needed when it gets down to the end. And we all know, unfortunately, there is probably a decent chance that we might have a red flag and a last 2-lap dash or 1-lap dash. I don't know how they're going to do that. It's still up in the air. So, I would have to go with Newgarden in that regard. Just seeing what he did last year. Also, just seeing him in race running, I feel like he's probably the strongest of the three in race running. Power, although he's sort of, probably my second pick out of the three to win it. I feel like he has a tendency to really be quite aggressive on his tires, and I've seen it in the past couple of 500s where he's really strong at the starts of runs and the starts of stints. But I feel like he uses the tires up quicker and then starts to drop back at the end of a stint. So I've seen that firsthand racing around him in 2021, in 22, I believe, as well. So, so I think he could be a threat, but I figure like right now, if you had made me put money on this, I'd probably put money on Newgarden of those three Penske cars to win it. But I guess the better question is who won in '88.
It was Rick Mears. It was from Rick Mears.
Okay, well in that case, maybe I'll change it to Scott McLaughlin.
I think I probably agree with you. It was really interesting talking to Scott on Sunday evening. Had a 10-minute solo interview window with him after he clinched pole. Really interesting. And side note, there's a story on this that you can dive into more for those that are listening if you want to on IndyStar.com that posted this morning. But it's interesting to hear him talk about how he didn't feel like, even if he had been up in Joseph's position a year ago, fighting in the top 2 or 3 over the closing laps, he didn't think he would have been able to win this race. And he came in with a renewed and recently developed confidence on ovals that he said developed during the doubleheader weekend at Iowa. He just was starting to figure out ovals better. He started on pole at Gateway, or clinched pole and had a 9th-place grid penalty, so didn't start on pole at Gateway. Said he's just kind of he's something finally clicked in his mind, and he's starting to figure out how not just to find speed on ovals, but to race and the way to kind of outsmart your competitors. Now we haven't seen him do it yet. He hasn't won on an oval yet, so it would be a pretty Herculean task to do that. But we've seen drivers in the past get their first wins on ovals in the 500 actually fairly recently. Marcus Ericsson, one that comes to mind, along with Alexander Rossi back in 2016 when he won the 500 as a rookie. So listening to him talk, he sounds very confident. He sounds like he's got a lot of this figured out. He's watched an unhealthy amount of video footage. He is working with an unnamed ex-driver that he was very sheepish about, but also made a point to note at the same time multiple times over the weekend. That's a curious thing that if he wins, we'll love to find out a little bit more. But it sounds like he's certainly coming in more confident than he has these last couple of years. But Joseph, as we've seen the last 4 or 5 years, he is the person to beat on ovals every single time we go. We've seen it. We saw how Joseph outsmarted Scott at Texas a couple of years ago. We saw how Joseph outsmarted Marcus last year in the 500. It's just really tough to imagine if those two got into like a similar battle like we had at Texas a couple of years ago, that Joseph doesn't find a way out on top. I will say, though, the idea of those two guys going wheel to wheel over the last 5 laps for this race win would be appointment TV to another level, knowing all of the stuff that has gone on behind the scenes between those two over the last half year or so, since Bus Bros kind of fell apart. Their friendship splintered. If you were watching the broadcast on NBC on Sunday evening, you will notice one of Scott McLaughlin's teammates came and congratulated him. One of them did not. When we were in the press conference room with all three Penske drivers, Joseph, for the most part, was kind of just staring stone-faced straight ahead. No interaction with Scott whatsoever. Scott, I think, referenced a little bit of Joseph and his race win last year and how strong of a teammate and competitor he is and what he'd learned from him. Joseph, in none of his interviews that I know of, mentioned Scott by name. Just like these little things that if you were even like remotely on okay terms with someone, that you would drop a note of, congratulatory note in there, even if you didn't mean it. So there's that. All that being said, I know how much both of these guys want to beat each other, and if we get a duel between them down the stretch, like I'm picturing a Dario Franchitti versus Takuma Sato 2012, no one's willing to lift going into turn one on lap 200 type of situation, potentially.
Otto and Ericsson last year as well,
Otto and Ericsson in turn three with like 7 to go. You're right. And I don't know who's Dario and who's Takuma in that situation. But it would be really, really fun to see.
I feel like in this scenario, I think Joseph, he's probably got a fire burning inside him, with having to go through this weekend. It's kind of crazy because on Friday I thought, oh, it's a lock. Newgarden's got the strong, looked to be the faster car on Friday. Even Will Power admitted that he probably didn't have the faster car. And then both days he was the third Penske driver. So it was that was a shock to me. So I'm sure going through that weekend for him, it's probably lit a fire inside, and that's going to be burning strong at the end of the Indy 500 if he's got a chance to go and clinch a second. So, I feel like he's going to be the aggressor in that situation. Outside of those three, the car that to me stands out as being the best, at least in traffic, I don't know how it's going to fare up front in clean air, but at least coming through the traffic, Colton Herta looks
agreed
like the one to beat, but that it's kind of tough to say that or tough to predict that, because he's going to be on a different kind of schedule than the three Penskes. He's starting back in 14th. He's been working on race running. He's got a really strong car in traffic. I'd say the strongest car in traffic. The way he's able to run as close as he is to cars ahead of him, it's not about running close to a car when you're in the first couple of cars in a train. It's when you're 8 or 9 cars back, and that turbulent air is just wild back there. Usually you're kind of stuck. You're stuck about an invisible 2-3 car lengths, and you just ride in that train. And he's able to get up behind them, get closer, make passes all the way back there. So that tells me he's got a really good race car to deal with traffic. But starting 14th, you're going to have to load up on downforce a little bit more than, say, the three Penske starting on the front row. They might be able to be a bit more aggressive with their trim level. So when you get down to at the end, if Colton's made it up there and he's battling those three, he might be at a bit of a disadvantage. But, we'll have to see how that all shakes out. I think it's going to be really interesting either way.
It would be interesting, too, to see if that's the case, how that team goes about making in-race adjustments. It's been a while since we've had an Andretti car fighting for this race win, really probably since Alexander Rossi with Simon Pagenaud in 2019. So it'd be interesting. That's a team that we've seen over the last couple of years can show some flashes of speed and strength, but sometimes has faltered on the finer details of things, whether it's a bad pit stop or a bad strategy call or things like that. Now, I do think they've made some really good strides with some of the changes that they've made over maybe the last 12 months, as well as the continuity that they tried to keep in place over the off season as well. I'd be interested to see how the addition of Craig Hampson can become an asset for that team, Colton included. But yes, that's one of those cars like we saw last year. It's possible. Joseph Newgarden started 16th or 17th and came through the field and won. So it's doable with this era of car. It's just not easy, and you have to have a perfect day, and you have to tune your car just right. So interested to see how that goes. Well, let's move on to the second row here. Alexander Rossi on the inside, Kyle Larson middle, Santino Ferrucci on the outside. Really interesting group of three guys here. I think there's things to note on all of them. I loved how Alexander Rossi has sniped back at the Penske guys in a couple of his interviews on Peacock and NBC this weekend about being clearly frustrated at the level of confidence that those Penske drivers have exuded. Fortunately for him, they went and backed it up on Sunday. But he seems like he has a fire in him that we maybe haven't seen here in a couple years, and we have gotten a great view multiple times into just how fun it is to watch an angry Alexander Rossi on track at IMS. He's made some of the most incredible moves and passes over the last 5, 6, 7 years that we've seen in this race. He's got an incredible mark. I think he's made 8 starts and he's finished in the top 7 6 times. He's got 5 top 5s. Starting 4th. I don't know if we're going toe to toe. I don't know if his team quite has the same car to match the Penske's. It might take 1 or 2 of those Penske's kind of falling back or making a mistake or having a crash or a bad pit stop or something. The idea of him being able to beat all 3 of those Penske's on a level playing field, I don't know if that's there, but would love to see him back in a fight again down the stretch. He's finished 5th the last couple of years, but not really been in the thick of things over that closing stint. So that's something I'm hoping for and hoping we get to see.
Yeah, no, that was on Sunday afternoon. That was really quite incredible to see just his determination to try and knock one of those. I think he knew that he probably didn't have enough of pole, but I think he was hoping just to break up the party on the front row and, really took a huge swing at it, trimming the car out. And you could see he wheeled that thing. Very brave. I guess at that position of the weekend, you can be a little bit more brave. You're not really risking that much, but you are risking your race car at the end of the day. So you don't want to, end the qualifying weekend on a bad note and put yourself in a behind going into the race weekend. But he held on to the thing where it looked like a bit of a bucking Bronco on those lap 3 and lap 4 in turn 1 and exited turn 1, the big wiggle. I'm like, wow, he must have trimmed pretty aggressively, held on to it. I mean, it showed you the sort of level of just competitiveness that he has and the professionalism that he has as well to just hold on to that thing. Lawson in P5, we talked a little bit about this off air, but it's, you kind of got dropped into like the just most golden scenario, right? It's kind of very similar, in my opinion, to like how, Fernando Alonso came in 2017. We take these world-class drivers, we roll the red carpet out, and we drop them into the best scenarios with one of the very top competitive teams in the series, and it looks easy. And my fear of that is that it looks too easy, and it kind of devalues a little bit about what the rest of the field is doing and how good they are. Having done this as a rookie in 2016 and being dropped into KV Racing Technologies car that was sort of assembled with all the old parts and scrap parts from, around the shop. It makes me, it's kind of like, wow, I feel like he maybe doesn't, or a lot of the people outside don't realize or don't appreciate just how difficult it is to run this race and to run those 4 laps in qualifying. And it kind of, if you put him into a KV Racing Technologies car that was assembled with bits, then, I think Kyle would be not quite having the same sort of experience, maybe wouldn't be having as much fun, and maybe would have a lot more, even more respect. Not that he doesn't respect this, but it's like people outside. I saw some comments from NASCAR drivers. Oh, look how easy it is. He just jumped in and went straight to the top. And it's kind of like, hold on a minute here, guys. Like this, like, what do you expect? You take a world-class driver like Kyle Larson, you put him into a world-class team like Aaron McLaren, and he's going to be up front, So that's the only thing. Like, it's cool to see him do the double, but I wish that maybe it was a little harder for him so people can appreciate just how difficult, running the Indy 500 is.
Interesting thing that literally just came to my mind. The last 3 really high-profile one-off rookies that we've had in this race. Kurt Busch, 2014 with Andretti. Andretti wins the race. 2017, Fernando Alonso with Andretti. Andretti wins the race. And 2022, Jimmy Johnson with Chip Ganassi Racing. Chip Ganassi Racing wins the race. There's nothing to that. It's just a weird coincidence.
Yeah.
But
Rossi there. Rossi for the win.
Let's see. Or yeah, that's definitely possible. One thing I'll say on Kyle, it would be really interesting to see him with not necessarily like one of the lesser cars in the field, but even just like a mid, like
yeah.
I'm thinking of these Chevy teams and tiers. Team Penske clearly tier 1. I would argue that Aaron McLaren's probably tier 2 by themselves. It would be interesting to see Kyle in one of these like tier 3, Ed Carpenter Racing or Brian Reinbold Racing cars, like just to see what he would be able to do with it. Because as you mentioned, when we drop these superstars of motorsports into an IndyCar and you give them all of these days to practice, it doesn't matter if they've never done any open wheel racing in their lives like Kurt Busch, or if they've done F1 cars, but F1 is so ingrained in themselves that IndyCar is still going to feel very foreign and they've never done an oval like Fernando Alonso. When you have this much practice and you are so good at this, you're going to figure it out. And when you have the best car, it just makes it that much easier.
Makes life really easy.
you build up your confidence quicker. You have better people around you. You have better teammates to learn from. And there's definitely an element to just the idea that when these guys do this, they do it with the best. And can understand that if Rick Hendrick is paying this much money and Jeff Gordon is spending this much time and they're risking a lot with their partners heck, if Kyle goes and gets hurt, he's going to miss the 500. And now that's a different scenario and them being even more likely to get a waiver than if he just flat were to choose to do a rain delayed 500 over the Coke 600. And that's a whole separate idea, but of course they're going to do it with the best teams out there. But yes, I would love to see Kyle like in Ryan Hunter-Reay's car, just to see where he would put it compared to Ryan. It would be a heck of an idea to put Kyle in one of a Dale Coyne racing car or a Ray Hollerman Lanigan racing car, and see when things are not good, how does he handle it, and how much better or worse is he when he doesn't have that experience. I feel like that's maybe a place where when you've got the experience that Graham has, where you can immediately when something's wrong, likely what it is, and you're able to compensate for it or figure it out or let your team know what you're feeling. I don't know. It's not something we will ever see, but it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. I just worry that we devalue the rest of the drivers, and devalue the race a little bit, like we put, seeing F1 guys in 2017 go, look how easy it is. He jumped in and went straight to the top. And then seeing NASCAR guys do the same thing. And it's kind of like, all right, well, jump in a AJ Ford car in 2022 and that's bolted together with bits, and tell me how easy that is, because I know that it's not quite as easy when you don't have the equipment underneath you. So
definitely
I'll leave it at that. But
yeah. We won the last driver on that second row that we'll touch on, Santino Ferrucci. I know Michael Cannon has been a big topic of conversation over the weekend into whether or how much of an impact he and the addition of the technical alliance between Team Penske and AJ Foyt Racing had to both sides. Michael comes hired from Chip Ganassi Racing after, I think, 3 years there for 2020 to 2022. He was part of Scott Dixon's championship in 2020, was part of the team at large that saw Marcus Ericsson break a decade-long drought at the 500 for CGR, and he goes to Foyt. You had some interesting stats or info that you were telling me about off pod, just kind of looking about Foyt's rise from 22 to 23 with Michael Cannon and Penske's rise from a speed standpoint from 23 to 24 when this alliance was out there. Again, we know that one engineer is not everything. There are other things that come into play, but I wanted you to get a chance to just kind of talk through some of that because I thought it was really, really interesting.
Yeah, no. So Michael Cannon goes from CGR, as you said, 2021, 2022, wins pole position with Scott Dixon, both those years.
Yeah.
I drove basically an AJ Foyt car in 2022, and I can tell you it was not friendly at all. It was rough. It was probably one of the scariest cars I've driven at the Speedway. Not good. And you got guys like Kyle Kirkwood back in 28th or 29th, I think he qualified. We all know how good Kyle is. So that's how bad the AJ Foyt car was in 2022. They add Michael Cannon over the off season between 2022 and 2023. They go from qualifying around a 2:31.1 was, I think, the best time from an AJ Foyt car in 2022. They jump up, I think it was around 2 miles an hour from 2022 to 2023. Suddenly now in the 2:33 range, fast 12, totally different, month of May for AJ Foyt Racing in 2023. So that, if you then take a look at the 2023 Penske times, fastest was in the, I think, P13 or maybe P12. I think maybe just scraped into the Vest 12. And you add, or you see the difference in speed from 2023 to 2024. It's about 1.6 to 1.8 miles per hour. So, maybe Penske had a little bit more figured out than Foyt did before the addition of Michael Cannon, but not quite sure how he's able to do it. Maybe it's a flux capacitor that he's dropping into the back of these cars, but Michael Cannon clearly brings something to the table that is elevating the teams that he's working with. And yeah, I think if you're Bobby Rahal right now, you're maybe calling Michael and going, tell me a number. Just tell me a number. Come join us for 2025. You would think that would be a very logical decision, and I'm sure a lot of teams are probably wondering that same thing.
I mean, heck, when you mention that, I worry about the amount of money that Bobby and Mike Lanigan and David Letterman and their partners have poured into this project. And they were talking in their annual Fast Friday press conference about, they weren't making predictions. They weren't talking like they were going to be on pole, but you hear them talk there, and what we've heard from their drivers, Christian Lundgaard and Graham Rahal in recent months, about the progress this team had made in terms of its 500 preparation, its approach, its R&D work behind the scenes. And Man, they talked about spending a lot of money, and they certainly did not get their money's worth. When you look at where they're starting on the grid, they are outside of Takuma Sato, who's starting 10th. Graham had some interesting thoughts about when he essentially claimed that Takuma was getting a special engine from Honda as a longtime Japanese driver for that engine manufacturer. You've got Graham qualifying 33rd. You've got Pietro Fittipaldi in 30th, and you have Christian Lundgaard in 28th.
It's not ideal.
If I am Christian Lundgaard and I was waiting to see how this team performed at the 500, and I am the hottest free agent on the market, I am having strong thoughts about moving on and looking for a new start, because yes, they can give him opportunities to win on road courses and street courses occasionally, depending on the venue and how they roll off on the weekend. But I know that 500 performance is really important to him, and being a championship level driver, and I don't think you can be a championship contender until you at least are middle of the field in this race. Just kind of from reading the tea leaves and hearing how he talked to us originally back in St. Pete about, I don't want to make any decisions before the 500. I want to see how this team rebounds. Yeah. And unless they just have a bullet of a race car underneath them and he can go carve up from 28th to 8th or something like that, I feel even more strongly than I had prior.
I don't think they do. The surprisingly, the best looking race car from Rahal, in my opinion, looks like Graham. I mean, he looks really good in race trim. So that's surprising. But the other three Rahal cars, they look scary. I mean, when you go on board with Pietro, several times yesterday, I was just like, wow, like you need a pit, buddy, because that looks like it's about to go in the wall. So I think Pietro, I mean, this is not his first 500. This is, he ran this in 2018 or 2021.
2018, he was supposed to, and
that's right.
Didn't happen when he had his crash in sports cars in Europe and WEC, and then he came back in 21.
Because I remember doing an appearance with him, and I couldn't remember which year that was. It was 18 or 21. So 21. He did this in 21 with Coyne, and he looked really strong all month. Just really, really looked easy for him. And this month, every time they've gone on board with him, which is a fair amount. He's one of the guys that has an onboard camera. It's looked terrifying. So it's kind of bizarre because you've got a fast car. One of the cars really fast in qualifying. The other three not so good, and then Graham's really, as the slowest car, is really good in race trim, and the rest don't look so good. So it just seems like it's really disconnected in that camp. And like you said, I mean, if you're Rahal right now, like you need to find a magic bullet. And I think Craig Hampson and Michael Cannon are both two magic bullets out there. One of them's probably locked up for the foreseeable future. One of them might not be. So you need to start making those calls, and you need to start doing them fast, because that'd be my take anyway.
Let's move through a couple of these rows a little quicker. I'll go through maybe these two at a time. Row 3, Rinus VK, Pato Ward, Felix Rosenquist. Row 4, Takuma Sato, Kyle Kirkwood, and Ryan Hunter-Ray. One or two drivers that stands out or you feel like is notable among that group that we have there?
Yeah, we just discussed it earlier. I mean, Rinus doing what he did was pretty impressive. A little bit lucky too with the way that crash happened, being so late in the corner that he didn't have a full there wasn't a lot of side pod or just bodywork damage, So a lot of that stuff that they rub on, they fine tune over the winter that takes months and months, was still sort of semi intact. It looked mainly suspension-ish, and it didn't even look like it damaged the drivetrain, which is just super rare when you crash during qualifying at Indy, that you get that kind of a glancing blow. So really awesome to see that team turn it around, go back out there, get it in the Fast 12, and get a solid starting position for next Sunday. Obviously, Hunter Ray, a great job for a David versus Goliath team. I know what that team is like. I ran for him last year, and they didn't really improve that much year over year. They kind of stayed very similar, but that's all it took, with sort of the drop off in some of the Honda teams, and a couple of the Chevy teams that probably would have been in the Fast 12. There was at least 3 that I saw that had platinum events on their runs that probably would have been in the Fast 12, which would have knocked him down to sort of P15. So, year over year, they've kind of stayed where they were. Last year he qualified 18 at a 2:32.1, so he goes 2/10 of a mile an hour faster. But the demise of the Hondas and the couple of issues bumped him into that Fast 12. Still an awesome job by the whole team. So great job for Ryan Hunter-Reay and DRR Cusick.
It's a good one. Let's go to the next 2 rows we have here. So we've got row 5, Colton Herta on the inside. We touch on him a little bit. I feel like he very well could factor into at least the closing laps here. Still not entirely sure whether he'll be able to do this, whether he'll be able to win it. He's never really been in contention to win before, and I think there's something to, yes, we've had rookies win, but sometimes in a little bit weird fashion or odd, unique circumstances. And I think there's something to needing to contend before and kind of experience that before you actually are able to pull it off. So I would be really impressed if Colton could do this, having not won an oval at all for starters, and not really been in the thick of things at the end in the 500 before. But that will be something to watch. Be interesting to see if, kind of in a similar fashion, Alex Palou has a race car that the Ganassi crew has been talking about all week is really, really strong, regardless of where they qualified. It'd be interesting to see if Palou is also able to kind of do that same type of thing. He's also a driver that's been up toward the front, and I think in some ways has that experience of being close. And if he was up, in the top 3 over the closing 10 laps, he would be hard pressed to find too many drivers in this field that I would pick over him, I would think, at this point. But he's got to get there first. Yeah,
it's weird because last year and the previous year on track, you would see Alex Palou out there, and he looked like he had the best race car as well as the fastest car, and it was just an amazing combination. He could just carve through traffic. And watching practice, I just never really saw that. So it's interesting to see how bullish he's being. Also, can I just say it's super weird to see the DHL car out there and it not be an Andretti car. So it's just super bizarre because you're just so used to seeing that livery and associating that with Grosjean or Hunter-Reay in the past, and you're like, no, that's a Ganassi car now. That's Palou. So that is super weird. Herta, as you said, I think he's got the best race car. I'm not quite sure he has the fastest car to actually be able to contend in those closing laps. So we'll see what happens there.
One other, the driver that shares that 5th row with them, Callum Ilott. I know he was a driver that's been in talks of, could he contend for one of these 2 open Air McLaren seats for next year? And we now know that Théo Pourchaire is filling in for the rest of the calendar once we get past the 500 in the number 6. And we still have a race to run, but it's been interesting that Callum has been seemingly a good amount off of his teammates. Pretty much this whole past week in practice and in qualifying, was the only Air McLaren car not to be in the Fast 12 qualifies 15th, so not too far off, but still not quite there. I think there were a lot of us, including myself, quite frankly, that thought if you dropped him into an Air McLaren car that he was going to be right there in the thick of things. We know that this car has not been the easiest, more so on road and street courses, I think, to drive in the past, because their setups and their philosophies are just so very different from a lot in the field. But I was a little surprised that we didn't see Callum closer to the pointy end of the field, and I wonder if not really jumping in and thrilling folks at St. Pete and Thermal to start the year in the 6, and unless he has just like a bang up job in the race, like I wonder how much he's really kind of in the top in the conversation with Alexander Rossi potentially coming back, Théo Pourchaire if he has a great year learning essentially over the closing 12 races that he runs. Christian Lundgaard, as we mentioned before, potentially coming into this seat. It would seem like, just from a performance and potential standpoint, unless we just really don't see much out of Pourchaire, I wonder if Callum is kind of lower on that, lower a rung down than you might have suspected before.
Yeah, no, that's he just hasn't really starred. I just can't remember really seeing him that much at all this week. So it's just kind of been a non-factor. I think it kind of boils down to the experience that he had before being at Juncos, being an only car that first year, and sort of just going into it blind, making it up as you go along, and you're making the best of it as you go along. And I think that race ended with him in the wall at turn 2. Every time you lose control of the car at Indy and you hit the wall, it kind of knocks your confidence, and you're just never quite sure of well, where is that limit, really at, because it's happened before. So I kind of wonder if that really plays into it a little bit. And also just the fact that he hasn't been around, teammates that have done the 500 before. I feel I'm very lucky in my time that racing for Andretti, the several years or 2 years that I did, your teammates with guys like Hunter Ray, with Colton Herta, and that experience just kind of flows down to you, and you sort of, hey, I'm feeling this. Is that normal? Yes. I'm feeling this. Is that normal? No. So you kind of learn what's good and what's bad. And I feel like those 2 years hasn't really set him up well for coming into this environment and being able to produce straight away. So we'll see what he does in the race. But yeah, as you said, really Rossi's on form at the minute. He's gonna, if keeps this up, he's going to solidify himself there again next year. So that's only one open seat, and there's a lot of competition for that one open seat. So interesting to see how that develops. I would expect that Christian Lundgaard would probably be right up there amongst the guys that they really go after hard.
Agreed. I look at this 6th row: Marcus Armstrong on the inside, Ed Carpenter in the middle, Kiffin Simpson on the outside. Thing that stands out to me is, gosh, I really hope Ed gets through lap 1 just being surrounded by 2 rookies that haven't done this before. Granted, Kiffin's, we mentioned last podcast, Kiffin has run a really clean start to his IndyCar campaign with CGR, made really no mistakes at all whatsoever. Marcus Armstrong has been pretty solid, but again, these are guys that are getting into their first 500, and that
unknown,
that unknown of what you're going to experience going into turn 1, lap 1, 3 abreast. You just
the turbulence. I remember my first Indy 500, and I had probably at least 10 drivers, veterans, whether they were in the race or they're guys that are retired, being like, "Oh, lap 1, it's just crazy," and they fill you full of this fear of the turbulent air. You've got to lift at the start finish in order to slow down, because the turbulent air just sucks you into turn 1. So I'm sure that Ed is probably going to be laying into them, the fear of, hey, let's just get through turn 1 cleanly while he goes sailing off around the outside of them. So, I think they'll be they should be smart. They've got some great coach or driver coaches / mentors there in Dario Franchitti, and then also even in Scott Dixon. They're going to be sitting down and going, hey, it's a long race. It's 500 miles. You're not going to be a hero on lap 1 and be remembered for it. So just get through turn 1 and set sail for the rest of the race. So yeah, I agree though. It's never ideal to be, starting on the outside of 2 rookies in their first 500 and, being that in that sort of middle part of the pack. That's never ideal.
Yeah, you got row 7 that I believe someone noted on Twitter is the second most experienced row that we've ever had in the 500. I think the only one better was, if memory served me right, it was 90. Which was it? 91 or 92 when you had Rick Mears, Mario Andretti, and AJ Foyt.
Wow.
It's Marco Andretti, Elio Castroneves, Scott Dixon. Scott Dixon, the fourth best of 5 Ganassi cars in terms of qualifying performance. Really a head scratcher. It's his lowest spot on the starting grid in what will be his 22nd 500 start of his career. This is where you start getting into the, I don't care how good of a race car you have. I just think you're too far back to really be in strong contention. And that's weird to say about Scott Dixon. But it would be probably I think it would be safe to say if he won this race from 21st, it's probably the best performance of his star-studded IndyCar career.
Yeah, no, I mean, he started in a pole for 2 years in a row back in 21 and 22, and missed out on clinching a second Indy 500 win with those opportunities, and
finished second in 2020 too.
Yeah, so many near misses the last couple of years. Maybe starting where all this far back. Maybe that's the secret, or maybe this is the red herring. Trying to throw you off the scent, but he actually looks like he's got a good race car. He's mixing it up with the guys at the front. It looks like he can make passes. But I agree, it's starting all the way back there. You need to have some really good stops. He's got several rookies ahead of him. He's a master at getting there's so much time to be gained in just getting slowed down to PLC speed. And he likes to push it every year, as we saw. Was it last year or the year before? Pushed it too far, got the speeding penalty.
22, I think. Yeah.
Outside of that, though, he's the benchmark all week. You're looking at those sector times, and he's setting the benchmark there. So he's going to be able to make up positions over some of these guys just in pit stops alone, taking that kind of advantage out of people. You can take half a second or even a quarter of a second. Sometimes that's enough to just leapfrog someone. So he can make up positions. We all know the pit crew there on the 9 is really strong too. So he can move forward. Again, I just wonder if you're starting that far back, similar to Herder, you're probably cranking more downforce into it. So when you come down to the end stages, if you're at up front and you're battling for the lead, you're carrying more drag, and that's gonna severely impact your ability to race and compete with the Penske guys, which we assume is going to be up there.
Yeah, it seems like a guy kind of like Alexander Rossi the last couple years, like fight his way up to like 5th or 6th by the race's end, but just not a guy that you're really far enough back that you're not really ever thinking about him in the closing stage of being a guy that's going to win this race unless there's just a catastrophe up ahead of him. Interestingly, right behind this second most experienced row ever, we have 2 rows that have 4 combined starts in the 500 out of 6 drivers. Augustine Canapino, Stingray Robb, and Christian Rasmussen in row 8, 1 rookie and 2 second timers there. And Tom Blomqvist, Romain Grosjean, and Linus Lundqvist, a pair of rookies, and a driver making his third start in 500.
That is a dangerous row. I'm just going to point that out.
I would say potentially both of those could be a little dangerous. That could be, if you're looking for like early lap one carnage, guys being willing to, take a risk, making moves, not having a whole lot of experience, I'd be a little worried about that portion of the pack. And guys that, I mean, Grosjean has had speed on ovals, but also is willing to take some risks, and then also doesn't have a great history with this track, to be quite frankly, over the last couple of years in his 2 starts. So.
And Rasmussen has been really aggressive all week.
Yes.
But as a rookie, he is showing it sometimes by just some of the placement that he's put in his car. A lot of people like championing it, like, oh wow, look how exciting he is. He's running side by side in turn 1 and turn 2. I can tell you the rest of the drivers are like, well, what are you doing, man? That is not what we're doing here. Like, that's going to end in tears for you or me. And, that's, there's, I'm sure Ed is probably going to be mentioning this to him, but that's not a good place to be. And as you saw, it got quite the reaction from Colton Herta with the one finger salute as he did that earlier in the week. So as I look at it, that is the danger zone of the of all the rows. That those 2 rows just goes, well, I don't want to be starting anywhere around that.
No, and it's something to watch when you have a row and a 10th row, guys like Christian Lundgaard, solid driver. Connor Daly led laps in this race a couple different times over the last 3 years, and Pietro Fittipaldi starting 28th, 29th, 30th, a row that you would not have been surprised to have been like row 5 if you went into this month not knowing how those cars were going to be, knowing that Ryan Reinbold was somewhat solid, kind of just above better than, just above average last year, and maybe being hopeful about what the RLL cars could be. It's a little surprising to see that group of 3 guys back there on row 10.
Yeah, no. So Connor was one of the other cars that had the Plenum Fire event.
Yes.
And that impacted his lap 4. I think without that, if he'd done the same lap as lap 3 on lap 4, then he would have been 24th. So several rows higher. But, I think he's got a good race car just from the, what I've seen in the week. So I think he's going to be able to climb up higher than that. And he always managed to find his way to the front. So wouldn't be surprised to see him, claw out a top 15 or even a top 10, in the race, So, but yeah, no, I'm sure he would have liked a little bit of a better qualifying run and being a lot closer to his teammate. But, being stuck back in 29th, I'm sure he'll be moving forward.
Yeah, agreed. And then that last row, we can touch a little bit real quick before we wrap things up here about the chaos, excitement, whatever emotions you want to characterize for that last chance qualifier that we saw on Sunday afternoon. Catherine Legg in your 31st spot for Dale Coyne Racing. Marcus Ericsson, a big surprise, the 2022 winner, in the middle of the back row, and then Graham Rahal on the outside of row 11, where he started a year ago. Though he didn't really even start there a year ago because his car didn't start on the grid, filling in for Stefan after your crash in Monday practice. What was that like, watching this group, these 3, and then also, of course, Nolan Siegel, what he went through, battling it out, mistakes, risks, really sketchy cars. What did you notice from watching that LCQ there on Sunday afternoon?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the format is close. I think that there's several areas that I think they can improve just the format. As the rail team alluded to, they're in the same position this year as they were last year. If you're on the outside looking in, you can go and make another run, and it doesn't hurt you, and it allows you to cool the car down just by running around slowly, getting airflow through the car, and that allows you to then make a proper run. Whereas, in an hour time frame, if you've made a run, you can't, and you're sitting there on pit lane and you're in, you can't make another run. So you're sitting there, and the car really doesn't cool down that much. So you kind of put yourself at a disadvantage, and you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, if you make another run, right? So I feel like there's a way to make that better where we can see more. Like it seemed like there was all this excitement, and then all of a sudden there was 25, 30 minutes of just nothing, and then all this excitement again. And I think they could do something to enhance the show there, look at how we can make it a bit fairer too. So he allows these guys to maybe make a run without losing their time. So we can see a bit more action going on during that hour window. For Nolan, unfortunately, his fate was pretty much sealed on Friday when he crashed and had to go to the backup car. He was already struggling for speed, but when you go to a backup car, that car's not had the love that the primary cars had for the previous 6 months. It's a road course car. It doesn't need to have all the drag reduction and all the body fit perfect, because it's just never close to even terminal velocity. Whereas the Speedway car they rub on it. They spend countless hours preparing that car. It was going to be a very, very steep task for him to overcome that. And he gave it his all. And, he's an amazing driver. He's doing really well on the road to Indy. He's raced, all these different sports car events. So he's, and he's only 19 years old. So it's kind of crazy. He's, he's going to bounce back from this. I know that. What I was alluding to on Twitter as well is just how much is on the line, during this bump day. You've got 34 cars, and pretty much every team out there is spending $1 million plus to put their car on the ground, enter it in the race, prepare it. And it's just mind-boggling that, for that 34th car, they've piled up basically $1 million plus and just set fire to it, because that's all, that's over for them now, So it's cruel in a way. People talk about the heydays when there was 40 cars turning up, 45 cars, but 10 of those cars, they just turned up on a whim. And, I'm not saying on a whim, but they turned up and they weren't spending anywhere near $1 million to put those cars together and get them, take an attempt. Some of them they were bringing on the back of a trailer. Some of them they were last year's car, minimal investment. And it was just a thrill to be making an attempt to qualify for the 500. If you make it in, it's a bonus, right? But not to discredit what there was going on back then in those days, but the stakes are just so high right now, is what I'm trying to say, is the amount of money that's involved and the amount of money that unfortunately goes to waste with guys not making it. It's pretty heartbreaking. I can sympathize a lot for both Nolan and Graham having to go through that 2 years in a row. So, I think also the other thing that was kind of strange in the format is, I think when it got down to like 3 or 4 minutes or 5 or 6 minutes left to go, Graham's in. And I believe that if you go again, you take your time off the board, but the guy that is currently 34th, his time doesn't move up. So theoretically, Graham could have gone out there with 5 or 6 minutes to go, drove around at 50 miles an hour, done 4 laps, taken up the rest of the clock, and qualified, and not allowed Nolan in another attempt.
I've heard that mentioned before. I think it was maybe Sage Karam that tweeted about it over the weekend. That was telling Dale before Marcus bumped his way back in. Essentially said, like, Dale, Nolan's in the field, go out there and run around and pull out your time, but then put it. I've never had a chance to ask race control about that, because that feels technically legal, but also like very much clearly not in spirit of what we want to see going on. But from a strategy standpoint, if that's legal, then 100% you should be doing that. I would, and I wonder if it will take. I wonder if it would take someone doing that for them to change up that loophole. I wonder if teams have been told there is
Minimum
there's
speed
a
or something.
minimum
Yeah.
speed that
Yeah.
if you go and you only run a 2:10 lap, like we're gonna black flag you, and then you don't have a time, and you pull yourself out. I don't know. I don't know what's been said publicly or privately about that, but it's something that I feel like has been mentioned in the past and then came up this year and was very relevant for sure.
Yeah. No, I mean, technically, that's not the case because I think Marcus went out there and didn't he do a couple of runs just to cool the car down? And he did a 4-lap run that was like in the 150s, or was that VK on Saturday?
Oh, on Sunday, I know Marcus did that once because he was out.
He was cooling the car down. Yeah.
But
they didn't wave off the attempt though. So
yeah, I wonder if there's something between. But he was out of the race, so
Okay.
that maybe is fine. Whereas if you're seen to be trying to
block,
manipulate,
essentially,
manipulate's not the right word, but it's kind of close to that. Just kind of trying to go against the spirit of
it's a loophole, and I think they need to look at that because the other thought I had as well is if there was when I think it was Marcus qualifying, right? No, if there was more than 34, if there was 35, and you've got two guys there, and the guys in 34th or 35th gets to go.
Yep.
With 10 minutes left, and he crashes like what Nolan did. Does the guy that's in 34th that's lined up ready to go? The clock's gonna expire. He's not gonna get another attempt. So it's like, I feel like that whole format I feel like it needs maybe just a few tweaks just to make it cohesive and make it work. Because next year it really could be 36 cars, and I think that this is the first time that format's really being tested.
Yeah, agreed. All right, that's the field. Let's before we go, let's make some picks as we did last week for poll.
I'm gonna let you go because you're clearly Nostradamus.
So funny enough, I have picks that are due to overdue for my boss, Nat Newell, if he's listening to this, and I have not given this as much thought as I would like to. So I will make some now, and I will say that I'm not holding myself to them on what I make in the paper because I'm making this on the fly. But I'll even go as far as I will, because this is what we have to do in the paper. I will pick who I think is going to be first, second, and third, not just my three contenders. I will pick. I'm going to pick Joseph Newgarden to go back-to-back for the first time in more than 20 years. I'm going to take Colton Herta to finish second, and I'm going to take Scott McLaughlin to finish third.
I'm not even going to lie. That is my first two are the same. Newgarden first, Herta P2, P3. I'm going to go with actually Rossi for P3. Okay. I wouldn't be surprised to see Dixon in the top 5. McLaughlin also in the top 5. So I even go. That's probably my top 5 right there.
Cool. All right, that's it. We'll see how that all shakes out. Thanks again for Stefan for joining us.
I'll be at the track this Friday and Saturday, so I'm looking forward to seeing some fans over there at the Speedway. And let me know if you've been listening.
Carb Day will be an awesome day to be out at the track. I think ticket sales have been trending up even beyond last year, and I know last year had a bunch. I think they typically on these days hold upwards of 80, 85, maybe even 90,000 fans here at IMS, which will look small at the racetrack, but is an incredible amount of folks for a practice and a concert and a pit stop competition. Great day. Encourage you if you haven't been out before, if you're going to be in town for the race, to come out to the track. It's an amazing day to be out here. Parade is a fun thing to do if you are going to be in town for the first time to watch the race. It's just a cool tradition. Really kind of get a taste of downtown Indianapolis. And as we're here all month at the Speedway, downtown is close, but it's still kind of far removed from what we're doing. So it's really neat to get a sense of downtown Indy coming into the mix, and then we will get roaring on Sunday morning. Gates open at 6 with the cannon blast. I will be here probably a couple hours before that, getting ready for everything that day entails. But really excited for this race. Really excited to see all this play out. All of these interesting storylines coming together for the biggest single day sporting event of the year, and certainly the biggest day that this series has on its calendar. We'll have a recap episode next week. I will be continuing my video series, Pit Pass Live from the track Thursday, Friday, and live on race day morning. If you are up and watching things from home and want something to kind of get you into the mix, want to hear from some drivers, Mackenzie Salmon and she's a colleague of mine from USA Today, will be in Gasoline Alley live, taping for a couple hours to lead into the NBC pre-race that starts at 11 a.m. Lots of stories. I am going to be locking myself in the IMS Media Center for the better part of the next 36 hours to finish up a couple stories that I have some very hard deadlines for, but glad that we were able to tape this and talk about this field and this race before we get going here in a couple days. Thanks for tuning in, for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard, give us a like, a review, tell your friends. We enjoy doing this podcast, and obviously are certainly excited to break things down once we get past the 500 early next week. Thanks again for joining us, Stefan, and we'll see everyone next week.
Thanks for listening.